I was lead for the leg ulcer service in our trust, and I was very fortunate to be awarded a Department of Health grant to study for a PhD part-time. And one of the topics that I chose was to look at anxiety and depression, because in the running of the clinics I intuitively felt that that was a big problem for patients with chronic venous leg ulcers, but there was nothing in the literature to prove that. The key findings from the study was that yes, patients do suffer with anxiety and depression, approximately 25% of the leg ulcer population. And then on interviews, it was actually finding that the biggest link was between pain and odour and exudate. And it was quite sobering, really, particularly doing the interviews. It's in a way changed my attitude towards how I assess patients. And one story in particular that I think will live with me was a woman who was only in her early 50s, which for leg ulcers is very young, looking after a husband who suffered with Alzheimer's. He'd had a stroke, I think probably 18 months, 2 years previous. And one of the unfortunate consequences for some people with stroke is to get Alzheimer's. So she had a tough time, really. And one of her only outlets was to go out on a day when the carers would come and sit with her husband. And she talked about it was fine if the carers could come early in the week, because she had her leg redressed on a Monday. So if they came on a Tuesday, she would happily go out. But if they left it to the end of the week, she wouldn't go out, because she was quite a proud lady who became conscious that if there was any strike through the bandages, that people would actually in a way talk to her legs and not to her, and would make judgment calls that perhaps she didn't look after herself, or poor standards of hygiene. And particularly in the summer, I think it was June when I interviewed her, and she talked about the other aspect was if there was strike through, that quite often flies would land on the wet patch and how embarrassing that would be. So she actually almost stopped going out. One of the things doing a piece of research is it should make you reflect on practice. And the time that I was doing the research was around sort of 2002, 2003, when it was accepted, almost practice, that patients with leg ulcers just had their bandages changed once a week, and if there was strike through, almost, well, that was unfortunate, unless you had a clinician who was actually quite intuitive and would redress the leg more often. And I look back on my own practice and think it's a shame that I didn't have access to some of the products that we now have almost in our toolbox. And certainly thinking of just simple products like these super absorbents that would make such a difference to a patient's quality of life. A relatively simple, inert dressing that's not interactive in any way, that would just make such a difference, particularly thinking of the lady that I alluded to. If the nurses had been able to put that dressing on, then she could have carried on with her life and got out. Her only escape was that one day out of almost, I think, what had become a little bit of a prison sentence for her, really.